I think I heard that Forrester have a similar sort of risk assessment or ROI calculation report for various vendors. As a sales executive for Lapide, I typically go along the lines of what are your ICO fines likely to be? That's the Information Commissioner's Office. Were there to be a breach, in the client's organization, something like 4% of annual revenue, which far exceeds what you would actually pay for a solution. And it comes down to that kind of, if something actually happens, almost like a form of insurance. But yeah, it's just a kind of an added layer of protection, meeting compliance. I'm sure you're well versed in that whole area of the kind of GRC, that governance, risk management, and compliance. Could you briefly touch on that? What sort of strategies do you employ in your current role, and would you where would you start if maybe an immature IT team were trying to implement or improve upon their GRC?
So the fundamental purpose of GRC, it's a governance, risk, and compliance. So to qualify and to really define what that means, it's the governance. So you'll have like oversight from, regulatory agencies. The risk is the fear of the value or the cost of exposure if it was breached or compromised, etc. And then the compliance is really just conforming to the standards. So to summarize that, when you look at a policy, if you were my focus is I always look at. I advise a lot of startups, as you probably know from my profile and from other conversations. We do a lot of investing, and I talk to a lot of startups, on a daily basis. Typically, a lot of startups focus on like a CEO or even a CTO because they focus on the building of technology and stuff like that, but they never really focus on the security part of it. And it's been a few times where I've seen brilliant startups, but actually lose their vision, lose their way because they were compromised. They weren't a security first culture. I think that's fundamentally where you need to start. When you have a CTO, make sure that they're focused on or have some type of technical acumen for the security side of it, not just trying to develop their solution fast into market, because it won't pay off in the end, or it potentially could cause you everything in the end. So going back to what I was saying for the initial, for example, startup, you want to make sure that whatever your product does, you conform to whatever standard you need to. So if you're doing like a cloud services, you'd have to have like FedRAMP, for example, if you wanted to sell to the government, that in the United States. So that would be the GRC aspect of that would be trying to make sure that you go through all the policies and procedures of how to actually apply for FedRAMP and actually start that process. And then what you need to do is stay compliant and all the regulatory requirements after that. Now, granted, FedRAMP costs, a minimum of $100,000, so it's definitely not for like, day one startup. I'm talking about like as they're starting to progress, but it's this whole purpose is to build out some type of uniform standard. Even if we look at PCI, which is for the payment card industry, they want you to make sure that you have the basic rudimentary protections for protecting the credit card data. And the funny part about it is, at the end of the day, Visa, MasterCard, they don't really mind too much if you're the one that caused the breach, as long as you can afford to pay for it. Because in your terms and conditions of your merchant agreement, you're responsible for paying for all the cards that were compromised. So as a card member, you have a zero liability for fraud. The flip side is whoever caused the breach or whoever caused that issue to occur because they were negligent or what have you, they're actually responsible for paying for all those charges. So that's where Visa, MasterCard kind of, shifts the blame to, or shifts responsibility, correction. So that, I don't know if that's very a valid answer to your question, but it's always trying to start with what are your goals and objectives, and then trying to build out the policies and make sure that you're compliant to whatever regulatory compliances that you need to be. In my case, we touch credit card information, so we have to make sure that we protect that. Otherwise, we're responsible for any of the compromised data or compromised cards.